Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this presentation. We have been looking forward to sharing some of the wonderful stories that we've had the pleasure of diving into and uncovering over the last 3 semesters or so. My name is Kelly Pennington, and I serve as the chaplain here at the university, and I'm also an alumna of the class of 2016, and I'm pleased to... Thank you. My fellow 2016 alumna. And I'm pleased to work on this project with one of our current students, Maddie Meek, so I'll let her introduce herself as well.
As Kelly said, my name is Maddie Meek. I am going into my senior year here at Greenville. I am a theology major with a concentration in ministry and biblical studies. And this project definitely has a soft place in my heart. I've played basketball for 15 years of my life, and so it's just incredible to get to learn about the groundbreaking things that June Strahl and Phyllis Holmes did.
So our aim in this project is really to recognize how women's athletics got started here at Greenville University, in large part due to the contributions of these 2 women. And I'm very, very grateful for all kinds of reasons to work on this project with Maddie, but I'm particularly grateful because Maddie does have experience not just with women's basketball in general, but also Greenville women's basketball here on campus as well, as she was on the team the past 2 years. And the irony that I am probably the least athletic person who's working on this grant project, and I'm covering athletics. That irony has never been lost on me. But what I think has been a real gift for me in participating in this particular project, looking into the lives of these 2 women, is that as women's athletics have gotten started here at the university, it was not primarily started as a recruiting tool. It wasn't a way just to keep Greenville College relevant with what other colleges were doing at the time, but rather, in the lives of these 2 women, I see Greenville University women's athletics being used as a tool to raise up young female Christian leaders who then used the skills that they learned to continue to raise up more young female Christian leaders. So while I might not know a whole lot about basketball, about athletics, as chaplain, I think I do know a little something about discipleship, and that sounds an awful lot about like discipleship to me. And so we're going to start this story by taking a look at June Strahl, and hopefully that name sounds familiar. We have the Strahl Athletic Complex on campus where our football field, soccer pitches, baseball, softball diamonds, right, track and field facilities, all of that is part of the Strahl Complex, named after June's husband, John Strahl, who was a coach and athletic director here at GU for many years. And while the facilities may be named after John, athletics as we know it here on Greenville's campus would not be what it currently is without the contribution of both Strahls, including June. And so I'm grateful to be able to just directly recognize the contributions that June has made to athletics on our campus in this project. Just to give a little bit of biographical information about June to begin with, she was raised in Lansing, Michigan, and was the daughter of a Church of the Nazarene pastor. She did her undergraduate work at Olivet Nazarene College, where she graduated in 1946. And one of the fun things that we have down in our archives is actually her yearbook from her senior year at Olivet. And so it's neat to be able to see the many things that she was involved in while in college. She participated in intramural softball and basketball teams and was the president of the Women's Athletic Society at Olivet called the O Club. Interestingly, she was also listed as a physical education faculty member her senior year as well. So this idea of bringing together education and athletics was part of her life even before she graduated from college. She married John Strahl in 1947, and the two would eventually have 3 children together. June taught physical education and coached at both Olivet and Taylor University before moving to Greenville with John in 1950. And then here at Greenville, she also taught physical education, coached, and led intramural teams for around 10 years here on our campus. She eventually retired as a physical education teacher and dean of women at Hillsborough High School, where she served from 1970 to 1987. And then June and John were both inducted into Greenville's Athletic Hall of Fame in 1989. Now, although I've said how the Strahls were both very instrumental in starting athletics here on our campus, that's not to say that athletics didn't exist before their arrival in the 50s. In looking through the archives, particularly in our vistas, the yearbooks, I see references to intramural sports all the way back to as early as 1912. Very well could have been there longer than that. That's just the earliest record I was able to find. And even as early as 1914, that's the first time that a women's intramural basketball team was recognized. And the picture of that team is on this slide here. And again, even in those very earliest records, even if we don't have direct reference to what kind of intramurals were being played and things of that nature, it was clear that both men and women were participating in intramural athletics here on campus in the very earliest part of the 20th century. Now, just for a little bit of context, the very first intercollegiate basketball games for both men and women happened at the very, very, very end of the 19th century. So right around 1900. And interestingly enough, both of the universities who participated in some of these first intercollegiate games banned women's intercollegiate basketball immediately after some of those games. And I recognize that, or I think that's important to name, simply because really getting women's intercollegiate athletics started nationally was really this kind of tug and war, right? 1 step forward and 2 steps back for many years, right? In the earlier than quarter or so of the 20th century, really leading up to the women's suffrage movement, we do start to see women's participation, not just in athletics, but really in any kind of physical activity, starting to grow or even be encouraged at all for the first time. But then we see another drop off when the Great Depression hits. And then it wasn't until really World War II, after World War II, when women's sports really started to come into their own in earnest and become more common. And this was, again, then when we really start to see women's intercollegiate sports nationally start to take off, again, likely attributed to women joining the workforce during that World War II era, and being able to again, break some of those stereotypes of what it was believed women could or could not do. Now, by and large, those kind of patterns that we're seeing nationally were oftentimes true here on Greenville's campus as well, right? So even recognizing, again, in 1941, okay, again, around that World War II era, that Greenville noted that almost every woman on campus was participating in some kind of organized sport during that year. And you can see some of the options that were available for those intramural activities during that time. Intercollegiate, right, so one college playing another, those activities first started here on Greenville's campus in 1943, and Greenville College's men's basketball team played McKendree College in that first intercollegiate game. One thing that I think was really funny, but I also recognize I am probably way too into church drama, right? But before Greenville could start participating in intercollegiate athletics, it actually had to be approved by the General Conference of the Free Methodist Church. And it was a really close vote that was actually held here on our campus in Ladue Auditorium, right? That many Free Methodists were concerned that Greenville College was becoming like the world by participating in intercollegiate athletics. And one person even stood up and gave testimony that at another Free Methodist school, they were holding a revival meeting earlier in the week, and it was going really well. And then there was an intramural track meet on Saturday. And then the Sunday services just didn't go very well. And so they said, track, these intercollegiate athletics are having a negative impact on students' spiritual lives, right? So again, I think it's worth noting that none of this, right, was ever a given and did take quite a lot of effort and intentionality on the part of various administrators. As we turn to the Strahl's arrival here in Greenville, right, men's intercollegiate athletics starting in 1943, the Strahls arriving in the fall of 1950, and this is then when we really start to see intercollegiate athletics take off here on campus under their leadership. So particularly, again, June primarily took over women's athletics, and at that time that would have been intramural athletics. And again, I think recognizing this quote that's coming out of that first vista after the Strahls arrive is recognizing, yes, there were some intramural women's athletics and participation that have been going on for around a decade, really solid, but having the Strahls here did change the game, right? Even for the intramural teams that we started to see this revitalization under June's leadership. And then shortly thereafter, in 1953, we see the first women's intercollegiate basketball team, which was then led by Coach June Strahl, right? You can see her record there over her 8-year tenure. So women's basketball was our first intercollegiate team, again, led by June. But if you or I had attended this game, it would look very, very different than if we were to watch our women's Greenville basketball team today. In the archives, we have this story told by one of those, the members of that very first women's intercollegiate basketball team, Emily Chalker Moore, and she wrote this. I was privileged to be a member of the first girls varsity basketball team. We actually played 2 other schools that year. I'm embarrassed to tell anyone about the rules. Can you imagine? Only 2 dribbles and stay on your own side of the court. That Burrett gym was so tiny, and then to have those restrictive rules. But we had fun anyway, right? So to recognize that this start, right, even though it was this really big step forward for the university, for really society as a whole, that it was still something that was benefiting women and was teaching them new skills that would benefit them in a variety of different ways on and off the court. Women's athletics and really men's intercollegiate athletics continued to grow over the next 10 years under the leadership of the Strahls, particularly for women. Tennis and field hockey became some of the next intercollegiate sports for women here on campus. And under John Strahl's leadership as athletic director, both he and June added a total of 4 men's sports and 5 intercollegiate women's sports during their time, right? And just to think more broadly of what was going on in the world, or perhaps what had not yet happened in the world. Recognizing some of these pieces, some of these quotes, you can see the dates there are relatively important, right? That as women's intercollegiate sports are taking off here on campus, this is during things like the civil rights era. It's happening during things like second wave feminism, and perhaps most importantly, is all happening before Title IX regulations would have been in place too, which would have happened in 1972, right? So Greenville is recognizing some of these important pieces, not just of cultural norms that we would have today or even federal laws, but recognizing the importance of the role of women and recognizing, as this quote says, right, that the basis of sex is not going to be a limiting factor in a person's ability to play, receive an education, or to lead as well, right? So again, I think it's really interesting to recognize the ways in which Greenville's women's athletic programs really were on the front edge of the development of women in sports. And I think a lot of that does have to do with June, with her attitude, and with her work ethic. In her Olivet yearbook, so even as a senior in college, she was described as, quote, idealistic, an inscrutable thinker, self-contained, a bewildering insight, self-confident, yet free of conceit. And I do think it's skills like those that served her well as she helped launch women's athletics here on campus, ultimately showing that other young women, showing young women that they can not just successfully participate, be skilled, or compete in intercollegiate athletics, but ultimately can lead and develop other people through athletics as well. One of those young women who June helped develop through Greenville College's athletic program was Phyllis Holmes, who would then really continue this tradition of using women's athletics to raise up leaders. And I'm going to pass it over to Maddie to share a little bit more about Phyllis Holmes and her story.
Well, she says a little bit, but Phyllis Holmes, it's never ending with her. So I first wanted to begin by explaining more of a general overview of what I want to talk about. So Phyllis Holmes impacted women's athletics on a personal, local, and national level by mentoring, leading, and trailblazing. And as Kelly explained, this work began with June Strahl and was continued by Phyllis Holmes, which has created a ripple effect that impacts many women today. So Phyllis Holmes was born on February 2nd, 1940, to Thomas and Irene Holmes. In her home state of Iowa, basketball was prevalent, and she had the privilege of playing high school basketball, which for many girls in that time, they would not have gotten that privilege. This eventually led her to Greenville College from 1957 to 1961, where she was a star athlete under the coaching of June Strahl. When she eventually returned to Greenville, she was a professor of physical education, an assistant to the vice president of academic affairs for 1 year, the director of the non-credit and special programming for that same year. She was the women's athletic director, and she coached 4 sports throughout her time at Greenville College. In her coaching career, she coached well over 35 women's basketball teams, 25 of those being for Greenville College, habit, around 8 women's tennis teams, close to 5 softball teams, at least 5 women's volleyball teams, and most likely more. Now, if we shot on the low end of this, assuming that each team had at least 10 players, that would mean she coached close to 530 women. This doesn't include the number of women that she would have come in contact with in her physical education classes and the women she would have come in contact with during her time as the female athletic director. As she coached these women, she impacted these women. I had the privilege of interviewing one of Coach Holmes' previous players, Tina Kraus. Some of you may know her. I'm not sure if she's here today. I don't know if I see her, but Tina played for Coach Holmes in the late 1970s. She explained that Coach Holmes was a woman of faith. She lived a life of honor. Not only did Phyllis coach her, but she helped her rededicate her life to Christ. She described her as a pioneer and said that she truly laid the foundation for women's athletics. Coach Holmes empowered women like Tina to live lives of Christ-like character and service. And I asked Tina in our interview if Phyllis empowered her to do this, and she said, without a doubt. She cared deeply for each of her girls. She cared as much for the last person on the bench as a starter. She often challenged her players to do today well, and I'm not sure if there are any girls who played under Phyllis here, but that might be a phrase you're familiar with. She emphasized that to do today well on the court, but she often challenged her players to do this off the court in every aspect of their lives, in their leadership, in their faith, and in their classes. Tina Kraus went on to coach at Altamont High School and Taylor University. She implemented the things that she learned from Coach Holmes into her coaching style. Later in her coaching career, Tina came across something called the 3D coach. This was a term coined by Jeff Duke in his book, 3D Coach, Capturing the Heart Behind the Jersey. When Tina read and reflected on this idea, she recognized that her coaches at Greenville were 3D coaches long before Jeff Duke familiarized and coined the term in his book. They cared about the game, they cared about the emotion behind the game, but most importantly, they cared about the heart behind the jersey. Phyllis Holmes impacted Tina Kraus's life. She went on to become a college coach like Phyllis, loving the game and, more importantly, loving the girls behind the jersey. Tina Kraus is not the only woman who played under Coach Holmes to have positively impacted and empowered women like Phyllis did for her. There's a beautiful ripple effect when someone is obedient to their call and they love the Lord and others well. Greenville College and beyond have experienced the ripple effect of what June Strahl started and what was continued by Phyllis Holmes. Phyllis Holmes made an impact on other levels as well. Her impacts on the local level, including Greenville College and the state of Illinois, were remarkable. Phyllis Holmes led Greenville College's athletics programs from 1967 to 1991 in all of the roles that I explained before. She also held important roles for the Midwest Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. I'm just warning you, there's going to be a lot of acronyms. Sport people like to do that, and I don't get it. But that's the MAIAW. She was the Illinois representative for the MAIAW for 3 years, where she was treasurer for 2 years. She was the first representative for the MAIAW and the coordinator of the MAIAW Sports Commission. And her local work was never ending. She poured her time, energy, and soul into leading the women of Greenville and beyond. She set an example of what strong yet balanced leadership can and should look like. Her work did not stop at Greenville or Illinois. Oh my God, I'm from Indiana. I'm so sorry. She did exponential work at the national level as well. She was deeply involved in the National Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. That is the NAIA. She was involved with the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame found in Knoxville, Tennessee. She was involved in the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, the AIAW. Just a side note on the NAIA and the AIAW, they ended up merging, I forget what year, due to financial difficulties. So the AIAW was for women and the NAIA was for men, and they ended up merging. So within the NAIA, we don't want that. Phyllis Holmes stood as president for, I believe, 2 years. And as the NAIA president, she was the first woman to head a national body that governed both men's and women's athletics, intercollegiate athletics. And I also want to note that the NAIA, some of you may have heard of this, it is still a current governing body for intercollegiate athletics, and it has over 237 colleges in it. So it was a pretty big deal for Phyllis Holmes from Greenville to be doing this, but also the fact that she was a woman and the first woman to do this. She was the NAIA's National Women's Basketball Championship coordinator in 1980. The first championship happened in 1981. Just to note, that was 44 years after the first men's championship. She held positions as the NAIA District Number 20 chairperson of women's sports and the NAIA District Number 20 vice chairperson. She was the NAIA National Women's Basketball Championship director from 1980 to 1983. And she was elected to the NAIA Executive Committee in 1982 for a 10-year term. Her work continued. She helped develop the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, and as I said, that's found in Knoxville, Tennessee, where she was inducted in the year 2000. And I just want to note that this is the Women's National Basketball Hall of Fame. She was on the Divisional Implementation Committee from 1978 to 1979 for the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. And she was one of 3 assistant coaches for the U.S. women's basketball team in 1978. She also coached and managed the U.S. women's basketball team for the 1981 World University Games and brought one of her players with her, and the 1983 Pan American Games and World Championships. So yes, you heard correctly, she was a U.S. women's basketball coach as well. We see the beginning of this legacy with June Strahl, as Kelly talked about, and it is evident that Phyllis Holmes continued it and passed it to women like Tina Kraus and many, many more. Today, powerful women are leading. I can't help but think of Caitlin Clark, an Iowa Hawkeye alumni and professional women's basketball player for the Indiana Fever. Go Fever. She has set many records, and she is a role model for many young women today and girls. She experiences the benefit of what June Strahl began and what Phyllis Holmes continues. As I mentioned before, Phyllis Holmes helped start the first NAIA National Basketball Championship for women in 1981. But I want to note that the first NCAA National Championship for women did not occur until 1982, the following year. Now, 42 years later, the 2024 NCAA Division I Women's Basketball Championship game peaked at 24 million viewers. That's the most watched game since 2019 for any men or women's game, any college or pro basketball game. I don't think it's a stretch to look at that number and behind it, see the work that Phyllis Holmes and many other women put into giving women the opportunities that they deserve and the platform that they deserve. But beyond the game of basketball or women's athletics, as Kelly mentioned, we see the lasting impact of 2 women who served the Lord faithfully and loved others well, developing both players, but more importantly, developing disciples of Jesus Christ. What June Strahl instilled in Phyllis Holmes created a ripple effect that is truly impacting the country and even our world today. Thank you.
We have some time now for questions from the audience, and I also recognize one of the other unique gifts about our project is that we kind of have some of the more modern figures, and so I recognize there are probably many in this room who knew both Phyllis and June well and personally, so we'd welcome any comments that you might want to make as well.
And she made the coolest warm-ups for those who were around that time.
And for the 1980 game, correct? Was that it? I remember Tina Kraus talking about the warm-ups that they had made because Greenville couldn't fund for them to have warm-ups like the other women had for the state championship game that they were going back-to-back on their wins under Phyllis. That's cool.
I played in that first intercollegiate basketball game in 1953.
That's wonderful. Thanks for joining us. Yeah. That was the quote that I read. Was that from you? Yeah. The quote.
Yes.
Yeah. You're Emily. Yeah. Emily Chalker. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I've got a humorous story
taught here for a number of years, and I taught gymnastics.
This is Dave Alltop. People need to know who you are. Okay.
But I taught a gymnastics course. And in the year, I can look right up here and see her, Myra Wilkins was in my class, in gymnastics class. Well, in gymnastics, you do gymnastics. I mean, forward rolls, backward rolls, things like that. Phyllis came to my office. I can still see it. Don't you let Myra Wilkins, you can't let her do anything. She might get hurt. She might get hurt. So I got chewed out. And I said, what am I going to do, So, but she was a good student. That was a great team. Carolyn Parker, Tina, and I had a lot of those kids in class. Diane, all of them. Kathy Sherwood, I had several of them in class. And a lot of them were physical education majors.
Yeah, I definitely didn't give that enough attention. This was the back-to-back state championship team that Phyllis Holmes coached. And Tina told me lots of just amazing good times that they had those couple of years and so many other years. But yes, that was a really, really big deal because they were playing teams like Notre Dame, Cal Poly. I mean, these giant schools that, as a former Greenville athlete, I can't imagine playing like Notre Dame. I mean, we went to Carbondale and played SIUC, and I mean, we got whooped. Now it was an exhibition game, but yeah, some of these really big D1 teams that they were competing with.
I have something to say about June. My name's Rick Stevens, and I coached tennis for 17 years here when I was on the faculty. And Big John was my college coach. And Big John was pretty laid back about a lot of those kinds of things, and I think we probably played better than we should have at times, and we also didn't play quite as good as we could have at times, because he was pretty just laid back. But June had the spark in her. She was the competitive one. But it was June who taught me how to play tennis 60 years ago over where the junior high used to be. And so I decided, because I talked to Johnny Strahl, their son, just the other day. He couldn't be here, and he said, Rick, you got to say something. And so, not that you can see this, but this was the trophy I got in 1964 from June Strahl. Beginner tennis. I beat Kent Krober for the championship. He got the silver cup. I got the gold cup. It's sitting right there. It's about that big, But June really got me going and stayed with me. And when I was in high school and college, she would be the one who would come around after a match and give me some corrections, mostly corrections, about what I could be doing better. So anyway, I owe a lot to June.
And the best part about that picture, it says Ricky.
Yeah,
Ricky.
That's Dr. Ricky to you.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, I had both of these gals in my life. June was still here. She wasn't coaching and teaching when I was here, but she was still here and around with all of her words of wisdom, that's for sure. And so the cycle was just never ending, but Greenville College University is very, very fortunate to have a woman or two women like that to lead the way and to set the standards for all of us. And we should never forget what they've done for us. We wouldn't be where we are right now and what we have right now if it weren't for those two women. So thank you so much for this. And thank you all for the memories. And God bless you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for attending. Thank you for the many. I'm sure we could have gone on with more stories, and I really appreciate the stories that you all were willing to share. Thanks for attending, and look forward to some more refreshments in the next room if you'd like.